Most of us don't feel like it's safe to get in touch with our inner child. In fact, a lot of us probably use language like immature, childish, or even whiny baby to describe ourselves when our inner child does try to express themselves. But your inner child is an essential part of your being, and today we're going to explore some ways to gently and lovingly listen to that inner child. Hello guys, gals, and non-binary pals. My name is Megan, and welcome back to Healing Unscripted, the YouTube channel for accessible and relatable mental health content. Today's video is all about your inner child and connecting with the child that you used to be and the child that still lives within you. Let's start simple. What is the inner child? The inner child is basically the innate voice that you were born with. It is who you are when you boil yourself down to its purest form. No outside influences, no responsibilities, just your basic human wants and needs and expressions. Now, your inner child can be positive or it can be negative, depending on the influences that you had growing up as a child. If you had positive influences as a child, then your inner child is probably enthusiastic, passionate, and emotional. If, on the other hand, you had negative influences as a child, then your inner child might be resistant, impulsive, and emotionally reactive. Now, if you're watching this thinking, I'm not sure I have an inner child, it feels like I have an inner parent instead, like my parents' voices are in my head. If that's the case for you, I completely understand, because it turns out the inner parent is another major part of our inner world. The inner parent is basically the voice of your caregivers, which you internalized and solidified in your mind by the age of 4. If your caregivers provided gentle guidance and proper discipline, aka not bullying, then your inner parent is probably a relatively positive force in your life. They probably know how to listen to your inner child and take their needs and wants seriously. But if you're watching this video, then that may not be the case for you, and I completely understand that. If your caregivers were excessively harsh, cold, or even just indifferent toward you, then your inner parents may be more negative and may not take your inner child's needs into account when making decisions in your life. When you have a negative inner child, a negative inner parent, or both, that is when you're going to come up with a lot of conflict between the two, because your inner parent has needs and your inner child has needs, and unfortunately a lot of the time those needs are diametrically opposed. The inner child needs validation, acceptance, fun, and emotional connection. The inner parent needs control and stability and logical connection. As you can see, a lot of times these needs don't really line up, so that is when discord sets in. If this sounds really familiar to you, your emotions and your logic at war, and you've never really had the words to describe it before, comment below and tell me a little bit about it. This was my life for a really long time, and I had no idea that it had to do with my inner child and my inner parent. I didn't even know what those things were for a long time. But now that I do know about my inner child, I pay attention to her. I love on her, I dote on her, and most importantly, I listen to her. So here are 4 ways you can learn to listen to your inner child. Number 1, create a safe space for your inner child. If there was a space in your home that didn't necessarily feel safe growing up, don't make that your safe space. Go to the opposite room, basically. If the kitchen was a place where you got yelled at a lot, maybe go back to the bedroom instead. If the bedroom felt unsafe, then maybe set up camp in the living room. When I say set up camp, I mean get like the softest blankets, set some nice soft lighting, maybe with candles or with a lamp, and just make sure you feel comfortable and cozy. Number 2, write a letter to your inner parent. This is going to help you get in touch with your inner child's voice, because the opposite of the inner parent is the inner child. So if you're writing to the inner parent, it makes sense that that letter would be from your inner child. And as you write, your inner child's voice is going to come out on the paper. Number 3, when you notice conflict going on in your mind and you think it might be related to inner child, inner parent conflict, start writing down the conflict as if it were 2 people arguing. Then try to figure out which person is your inner child and really pay attention to that side. Finally, number 4, write a letter to your inner child as well. It's important to listen to your inner child, but it's also important to talk to them, to let them know that you hear them, to let them know that they matter. Okay, so once you start listening to your inner child, you're going to notice that things are automatically going to start getting easier. But that doesn't automatically solve all of the conflicts between the inner parent and the inner child. Now, I'm not here to say there's some magic fix that's going to solve these things, but I can say that there are 4 different methods for resolving conflict between the inner parent and the inner child, and one of them is a lot better than the others. The first scenario is win-lose. This is where the inner parent wins and the inner child loses. This scenario is the most common one among people with toxic shame, and if you're interested in what that is, you can check out this video. When the inner parent wins, we might tell ourselves that we're being responsible. We are doing what we're supposed to do, what we should do. And the truth is that that's not the only thing that matters. Our inner child's needs matter as well. So this is not the perfect solution, even though it might feel like the grown-up solution or the solution you're supposed to choose. It's really not. There are healthier options. So what does this look like? A win-lose situation might look like when the inner child wants to reach out to a friend because they're feeling sad, but the inner parent says no because you don't want to be a burden. Do you see how this isn't necessarily the healthiest option? The inner parent got to feel mature and in control, and so the inner parent got their needs met. But the inner child is still sad and still needing that validation and connection, and their needs aren't getting met. The next scenario is lose-win. This is when the inner parent loses and the inner child wins. Now, because we're trying to get in touch with our inner child, this might seem like the scenario you want, right? You want to listen to your inner child. You want to prioritize their needs above everything else. However, that inner parent is there for a reason, and they can guide us toward healthy solutions that are responsible, whereas the inner child doesn't necessarily take stability or control into account, and when left to run rampant on their own, can make some really poor decisions. For example, this might look like when the inner child wants to release emotions in a really unhealthy way, and the inner parent tries to step in and suggest something else, but the inner parent loses in this scenario, and instead you end up acting in a way that is not necessarily healthy for you, even though it feels good to the inner child in the moment. The third scenario is lose-lose. This is when the inner parent and the inner child both lose. This might look like when the inner child wants to do something fun, but the inner parent wants to do something productive and responsible, and as a result, you end up doing nothing at all and lying in your bed all day. Sound familiar? Lose-lose is a really popular option with people who are starting to heal from their toxic shame, and they're angry that their inner child has been ignored for so long. And so they refuse to let the inner parent win, but they're also not really comfortable yet enough listening to their inner child and fulfilling their inner child's needs, and so instead, everybody loses. Okay, so we've gone through 3 pretty negative scenarios that we don't necessarily want to get ourselves into. But what does win-win look like? Is it even really possible? I'm going to argue that yes, it absolutely is. It's difficult, but it's possible with a little bit of compromise and a lot of listening to both sides. This might look like when the inner child is feeling a really big emotion and wants to express it in maybe not the healthiest way. The inner parent, on the other hand, tends toward logic and doesn't want to express the emotion at all and wants to stay in control. So a compromise between the two is finding a structured way to express the emotion. That way the inner parent still has a semblance of control, but the inner child still gets to express themselves. If you feel like you never seem to settle on the win-win scenario, you are not alone. For years, I either belittled my inner child and ignored them completely, or I let them totally take over my life, with no healthy in between. Then I finally acknowledged all of the shame I had internalized throughout the years, and my life just opened up. Once I acknowledged my shame, I could acknowledge the pain that my inner child had been through, and that allowed me to listen to her in a way I never had before. If you're ready to start doing this work too, sign up for my Inner Child Retreat. It's going to be on June 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can sign up at the link in the description. And as always, thank you so much for watching.